Hello, Steve.
Kevin, Marion, can you hear me?
Yes, but with a very big echo.
Okay, thank you. Kevin, Marion, is that better?
Yes, Katie.
He's on mute. Kevin's on mute.
Kevin, can you speak again, please?
Hello, hello.
There we go. Okay.
Is it just the, I am ready. Is it just the pictures that are?
You guys ready?
That's fine.
No
So,
camera.
that's fine.
Where's our network? Are we online with the OCA?
Andy, can you check OTA, please?
It's coming now.
We good?
We are good.
We're good?
Yep.
All right, Tim, are you getting on?
Yeah, nothing yet. I'm gonna
It just put.
try it.
You'll be able to be heard, you just won't be seen at this point.
Okay, I'm going to call the meeting order at 6:31. It's meeting of the regular meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education. Today is Monday, March 22nd, 2021. We are at the Oregon Senior High School Innovation Center, and board member Marion is appearing remotely.
Ms. Garrison, Mr. Maring,
Here.
Ms. Flanagan,
Here.
Mr. Pankratz,
Present.
Ms. Bijak,
Here.
Mr. LeBrun,
Here.
Mr. Zak.
President, board has a quorum. Ms. Garrison had advised me a few weeks ago that she would not be present this evening, had a conflict. I have proof that the meeting has been appropriately noticed under Wisconsin Open Meetings Law, and that proof of notice will be with Ms. Heights, if anyone wants to review that. Tonight's agenda has one change from that which was posted online. We're not going to be having a Dane County Youth Survey report this evening. Full data from that is not completed yet for other school districts, so we wanted to hold on that, and so that may be coming to us at the April 12th meeting, depending on the status of other districts reporting in on that data. Okay, so I would need a motion to approve. So we have one item, action item, that's the update on the athletic participation addendum. And then the information reports, the mental health update, and then our standard report from this year from Dr. Bergshall. So I need a motion to approve the agenda as posted with the deletion of the Dane County Youth Survey report.
So moved.
Second.
A motion on the second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. We have an agenda under consent calendar A. Is there any item that any board member wishes to have removed? Seeing none, I entertain a motion to approve the items on the consent calendar.
I move approval of the items on the consent.
Is there a second?
Second.
So LeBrun with the second. I would note that we have four donations. Tom Miller, $300 to the Oregon Pool. Sherry Hill, just short of $5,000 for the Oregon Brooklyn Splash Pad. Danny Gerper, $2,500 for the Oregon Brooklyn Splash Pad. And Richard and Margaret Straub have donated $15,000 for the splash pad. So very, very generous donations. So, Tim?
I'd just like to make a note about Margaret Straub. She has been helping lead up this effort for the splash pad for, I think, 3 years now. It has been a very long road, and she has done a great job and has stuck with it. And so not only do I appreciate all her efforts, but certainly the financial donation is greatly appreciated.
Great, thank you, Tim. With that, I would, we got a motion and a second. All those in favor, we don't have any contracts on here, so we can do that by voice vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion on the consent calendar carries, and thanks to those of you who have contributed to our district. Okay, so it's the information items 1. Pursuant to board policy 180, the board allows 15 minutes for comment from the public. This is not an opportunity for the board to engage in discussion on those public comments, but for us to hear those comments. We have 6 people registered to vote or to speak tonight, and so I'd ask all those of you who are registered to speak to confine your comments to 3 minutes so we can fit within our timeline. I'm going to go in the order that those were received. First up is Rob Palmer. Mr. Palmer, come on up to the desk and speak into the mic.
Good evening. I'm Rob Palmer. I am a resident of Oregon. After watching the last regular board meeting, huh?
Yeah, we gotta make sure we don't have it.
All right.
You got it? Okay, go ahead. Sorry about that.
I'm Rob Palmer. I'm a resident of Oregon. And after last board meeting, the last regular board meeting, the comments about social media and the rather obtuse remarks from the board members, I made a public records request for the training that was provided on transgender transitioning. I'll note that it's been 12 days and I've not received a response, so I will take it that the school district is stonewalling my response. But I was able to obtain a recording of a portion of that training. I'd like to read to you tonight some of what was said. So all staff and correspondence and communication to families in regard to a student will reflect the name and gender documented in Infinite Campus, unless the student has specifically given permission to do otherwise. So this might involve using a student's affirmed name and pronouns in the school setting, and then their legal name and pronouns with family. So in an event, if a student insists on maintaining privacy from their family, the staff would need to discuss those legal obligations with the student where applicable. That might be a specific basis with the student. That might be a one-on-one consultation with our human resources director. So, and then there would be contingency plans. So the school is working with us to do what is right for our students and to make our students feel safe. And we are working with the families so a family can remain feeling happy and working together and making progress. Now, Mr. Zock, at the last board meeting, you said we've never tried to hide anything. That's not a true statement. The school district is instructing teachers and staff to hide something from parents. And Ms. Flanagan, you went through a bunch of policy citations. I'd just like to walk through those. 157, anti-harassment, non-discrimination. Does that authorize the school to mislead parents? No. 163, bullying. No. 164, anti-hate speech. No. 354, instructional material selection. Now, it does say that the school board is legally responsible for all instructional materials utilized within the instructional program, but that doesn't really apply here because we're talking about a policy. We're not teaching the kids, we're teaching teachers to hide information from parents. 355, instructional material selection process, doesn't apply. 358, now that's an interesting one. Controversial issues worth reading. The district recognizes the rights of parents to inspect instructional materials and to excuse their children from certain curricular activities in accordance with state and federal law. But it doesn't apply. There was a policy that you didn't mention. That's 431, student rights and responsibilities, specifically 431.05.02, parental participation. The parent or guardian of a student under the age of 18 years shall have the right to be informed of all matters affecting the education and discipline of students. As a school board, you should be concerned that the school is instructing teachers to not follow your policy. Thank you.
Next up is Sherry.
All right. First of all, thank you all for the opportunity to address you. My name is Sherry Pollock, and I've lived in the village for 25 years, but I've actually been in the Oregon School District pretty much my entire life. I left to go to college and law school and worked for 6 years in Kenosha as assistant DA, but otherwise, my life has been Oregon School District. I have one son in 9th grade here at Oregon, and he's been here since the beginning. As we reach the 1-year mark of this whole new world of unprecedented situations and uncharted waters, I have 3 points I want to make tonight. First, I want to express my immense gratitude to you, the board members, and to you, our district administrators, for being so transparent and thoughtful over the last 12 months. Thank you, especially Dr. Bergstrom. You are always so professional, knowledgeable, and logical, even when placed in adversarial positions by others. Your leadership is exactly what Oregon needs now, and I truly cannot imagine getting through the last 12 months without you, your passion, and your commitment. I especially appreciate the opportunity to provide feedback on surveys sent by the district and how much information you provide to each board at each board meeting about what is happening in our schools. I also appreciate how helpful teachers and administrators have been through this time. When I emailed a question to the high school right before the semester change with some questions about what it's going to look like if we went in person, Mr. Pliner called me back on a Friday night. We were on our way to get dinner and he called me back. I didn't expect anyone to call. The most I expected was a response later the next week. I also appreciate all the extra work my son's teachers have undertaken over the last year. His biology teacher, a brand new teacher to Oregon, scheduled a meet and greet with all the parents. What a wonderful way to get to know her and for her to get to know her kids. Every teacher has sent us emails along the way telling us what is happening in class and what the expectations are, and that's made it very successful for our family and for others who I've spoken to. When he was in small engines class first semester, he picked up a free broken lawnmower off the side of the street in Fay Heights, brought it home, and fixed it and sold it a couple months ago for $40. He couldn't have done that without Mr. Lease. All of his teachers have been extremely accessible to him. I also appreciate the guidance counselors who are juggling constant schedule changes and requests to add and drop classes. Second, I want to share my family's path from phased restart to Oregon Online. As legal counsel at the Department of Public Instruction, I was very familiar with the virtual school world and its cottage industry. I was very concerned when the pandemic hit that Oregon would go with an easier but vastly inferior online educational model like those used by other school districts around us to attract open enrollment students. But early on, the commitment to do Oregon Online all year with Oregon teachers at the same quality level as in-person instruction reinforced my confidence in our district and its commitment to quality education. We initially chose the phased restart because I could see the board and Dr. Bergstrom and others were committed to making reopening decisions with the health of students and staff and our community at the forefront. I also knew that if circumstances changed, if our circumstances changed, Oregon Online was there for us. In the fall and early winter, however, I started to hear the rumblings and saw the protests of bring kids back, give kids a choice. I was concerned that the administration and the board would fold to the loud, squeaky wheels. For the most part, you have not. You have continued to be guided by our district's core values, and for that, I thank you. However, in the second semester, we chose to go online because we felt it was not safe, and the delivery of online education had been successful in the first semester, and the district was continuing its commitment to high-quality education for all students. We had been taking every precaution in our family to stop the spread, but we had seen many other families who had not. We decided that in-person attendance was an unnecessary risk given the successes we saw with Oregon Online. And okay. This was actually an easy decision for us because of the high quality. The one thing I do want to quickly mention is what I'm not happy about. What I'm not happy about in this community is our community response in some situations. In particular, a letter that was submitted to the Oregon Observer on March 17th that contained 5 pretty salacious and undocumented or unsupported allegations in a 400-word letter. Those allegations, one of them is one I'm very familiar with, and that is the use of ACT statewide scores. As a lawyer at DPI, I was intimately involved in setting up the predecessor to WiseDash and research data sets and know what concerns there are in making academic data like this publicly available. We were concerned with student privacy, integrity, but also misuse and misunderstanding of the data. Because of that, DPI includes explanations on its website when it makes that data available. The person who sent that letter to the Observer ignored those warnings and left the impression with our community that our community is failing its students. I think, as I have said all along in this statement, we are not failing our students. We are serving our students with a great deal of valor. And I am thankful for you, administrators, board members, and our staff and our teachers for that. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, school board members. My name is Melissa Kingsley. I know there's a few that want to speak tonight, so I will keep this brief. As with most people in our community, I fill multiple different roles. Tonight, I am speaking to you from my role as a mom. Although I wear many different hats, I'm sure it does not even compare to the amount of work you and our administration have put in this year trying to keep our kids safe. This past year has been hard on everyone, and it seems to have divided our community. It has been very disheartening to see neighbors fighting with neighbors, when at the end of the day, we're all reaching for the same common goal, which is what's best for our kids. Thank you for providing a phased-in approach with Oregon teachers for those who wanted their children in school. Thank you for creating a medical advisory board and listening to the science, as well as creating the least amount of transitions for our students. Thank you for posting videos of all of your past meetings, the meeting minutes, sending emails, and having a specific place on the website that all parents can go to see what they may have missed. Being on the school board and in the administration can be a thankless job at times. So I wanted to take this opportunity to say your hard work has not gone unnoticed. And there are a plethora of parents who are so thankful and appreciative for all of the hard work that you have done. But most of all, I wanted to say thank you for providing an online option with Oregon teachers. Giving families who risk factors or circumstances do not work well with a hybrid option, the consistency of online the entire year has been so critical. I am thankful we continue to support this online option with Oregon teachers, even as we are able to support other choices for other families. And even though both of my children have struggled and decided to go back in April, it would have been nearly impossible for any hint of success if they didn't have their designated Oregon teachers online. Thank you.
It's even if you could, it's hard to pronounce. It's Dubry.
I forgot to unmute it.
Okay, good. I was like, oh. Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah Dubry, and thank you for allowing us to come in and share with you. I am a mother of 3 children in the Oregon School District. I have a middle schooler, a 4th grader, and a 1st grader. And we chose phase restart for my kids. It's been a fantastic experience. My 4th grader struggled, and the teachers came in and said, he needs some extra help. Let's get him some intervention. Got him right back on track. And we've been supportive and so happy with this. But I also have friends that have done online and want that and need that for their kids. And the fact that we're offering these to parents and students needs to continue for us to all be successful. Lastly, I will tell you that my 8th grade son is transgender. He's very vocal. You've probably seen his name. And he has a very open home, right? My ex-husband and I are very affirming. We've always let them know, love whoever you want, be whoever you want. And guess what? He came out to his guidance counselor before he came to us and had a conversation with her about saying, are you okay with me telling your parents this information? Do you feel safe at home that they would be okay with this situation? And my son Owen said yes. So that was shared with me. And of course, we accepted him and we loved him, but not all families have that option. So the fact that we're creating a safe space for these kids to talk to people about what's going on with them and knowing they're not going to have any repercussions if they come home and mom and dad or whoever their parental figures aren't supportive of them. It's a safe place for them. He's safe at home, but felt comfortable there. So I applaud you for continuing to support and care for this community. As a mother, as a community member, I can't thank you enough. Thanks.
Green. Is that better? Okay. Hi, I'm Jeff Corbinus. I want to come and talk a little bit today, mostly about things, because my wife and I have 4 kids in the school district from 2nd grade to 12th grade, and they're in between. One of the things that we've been thankful, we made a decision early on last year with COVID. We're both frontline healthcare workers, and we wanted to make sure that, for one, we didn't bring it home and have our kids take it to school. So we decided to be online. So that, for us to have that option as a family, was really important for us. And we appreciate that going forward. One of the things that online education has actually helped is identify some learning disabilities from one of our children. And again, I don't think we would have seen that if we didn't have that option. I know that things are going to change. We're going to get back to school. Next fall is going to look a lot different. I think the challenge that we're having with our kids going forward, especially with how little of school is left this year, I think having a continuation of the online education is helpful for us throughout the rest of the school year. I think one of our children has struggled with kind of that change and ongoing changes. He had a teacher on maternity leave and then back and forth and different online options. And it's been a struggle with every change that he's had. So I think for our family, what works well is to continue to have those options of learning. I think that's been one of the helpful things for us, and we're appreciative of that. I think the biggest thing with ongoing routines and stability as much as we can with what little school year we have left. I think the biggest thing for us as a family moving forward is having that availability. Again, we don't know what's going to change with the different infection rates and whatnot. We know people are going to continue to get immunized, and we're hopeful that we can all be face-to-face again here soon. So appreciate it.
Hello, my name is Giddy Sekobernis, and I am in 7th grade at Oregon Middle School. I would like to start off by saying thank you to all of the staff members for keeping Oregon online for so long. It has been very hard for a lot of people, but we are getting through and we are almost done with the school year. And it's also been helping me personally because I could not imagine not having a designated teacher every day for all me and my classmates. And it's been something that has been helping that making this a little bit more normal, which is what we have been striving for since the beginning. And I realize that it also hasn't been working for everyone, but that I feel like is the whole reason we made the compromise. So to take that away is not making it available for everyone and just some, which I don't think is very good because we were doing so well. And yeah, thank you.
That is all the folks who have registered to speak. Is there someone who has not spoken, not registered, who wishes to speak? Okay, that completes comments from the public. Next up is OEA report. And Laura, do we have anything this night tonight?
Not this evening, thank you.
She's on.
Yep,
Laura. Hi, anything tonight?
Nothing this evening, thank you.
I gotta turn the volume up on the TV, sorry.
Just hang on, Laura.
All right, try now.
Okay, Laura, anything tonight?
Do you mean you just missed my beautiful solo song?
Yeah, you did. Sorry about that.
Nothing from us this evening, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Student report, Andrew.
Well, I'm going to start this off tonight with a story. I was playing tennis the other day with a friend who I hadn't seen since everything shut down last March. His last name starts with a letter that's different from mine, so I had no idea if he was in person or online. I asked him, and he told me he was online. As much as he wanted to see his students and be in school, he still chose online. Do you know the reason why he chose online? He told me, he looked me dead in the eye and told me, I don't want my teachers to know that I haven't learned anything this year. We are failing that student. Yes, this story is an anecdote, but it is an anecdote that should not happen in Oregon School District. I'm sure many of you read about that student in Baltimore who has a GPA of 0.12 and was expecting to graduate. The only difference I see between that student and my friend is that my friend's GPA for first semester of 2020 to 2021 school year was a 3.37. There are students all across the board who have had C's, D's, even F's, all the way up until the last 2 weeks of school, and finished with A's and B's, and maybe the occasional C. This is an issue in Oregon School District. It's not just online school, though that has contributed as many students check out and just log on to their classes, do the work, don't pay attention. We need to strive to push and get more kids doing actual classwork in school and with their teachers, whether it be online in Google Meets or actually in the classroom. We need to be teaching our students in the classroom so that students can learn, ask questions, and hear it from their teacher instead of from a video that the teacher's putting out. When it's that live feedback, the the student is much more likely to raise their hand, ask a question, and then they can actually understand the material. When you're actually in person, the teacher can walk around and see if the student does not understand what is going on, or if they know and get the material and can move on. That is my biggest complaint with the flipped schedule. I'm not blaming this all on the flipped schedule. I believe that there were a multitude of issues. Perhaps the student was not the best student. But the fact of the matter is, he was at 3.37 GPA. That's good enough for him to be cum laude. And he doesn't know, he feels like he has not learned anything. That's a student who's going to college next year and does not feel prepared. I feel that is a big issue with the Oregon School District. You know, it's March, and the perception of my job as the student liaison to the school board is that I'm supposed to update you on staff events like soccer starting today and football season, football with their first game. But it's my job also to inform you that there are students like my friend who are not being taught and not learning anything, and you're still passing and going to graduate with honors.
Thank you, Andrew. And I think we'll have Mr. Pliner, we'll confer with him and have him address your comments at a later point in time. Thank you. All right, that concludes our informational items. We'll go to action items. Number one is update to athletic participation addendum. And is that Mr. Carr?
It is, and I will get the presentation ready to go here. So Mr. Powell, just let me know when he wants me to change the slides.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bergstrom and President Zach. I just have a couple updates, and we have an action item in front of you with a purple. So I just wanted to give some information and answer some questions before action was taken on that. I wanted to update you. You've seen this before, but we've also wanted to make sure you see it again, that Public Health Madison-Dane County, in their most recent order, which expires on April 7th, has increased the indoor and outdoor gatherings. And as you recall, that has given us some flexibility and some opportunities to host games and competitions on campus. For our indoor gatherings, it's 350. For our outdoor gatherings, it's 500. But we also still have to have 6 feet of distancing. So that 500 number, especially for our outdoor sports, isn't it also includes players. So I'm going to show you on our next slide kind of what the Dane County athletic directors have come up with as far as school guidelines that we're going to use for the alternate spring season. So we will limit spectators in attendance. So we do follow the mass gathering guidelines in Dane County because, again, we have to count players, fans, officials, those sort of things within that number. We have decided that each student athlete will be allowed to bring 2 adults to their event. Our outdoor events, we will have home and away students. Students will be able to take an adult at home and on the road. We will not have general admission at our sporting events, so we will do kind of a reservation system that we've been sharing throughout the conference. So students and coaches will provide a list to the home administrator to help facilitate that process. We won't have any student sections because of the mass gathering limits, and then we won't do any concessions because if we do sell concessions, then that number actually slides down. So we just wanted to make sure you knew that. There was one co-curricular addendum change that I'd like you to consider. We would like you to consider to propose to remove the non-school sports requirement from the alternate fall procedures. So this would allow students to participate in non-school activities, which are typically club sports for the remainder of the school year, as long as the students follow the WIA rules. And those WIA rules, the WIA rules ask for prior approval. Coaches and administrators sign off on those. So we do get together and there is a process. It's not just, I want to do this. We have to walk through it and kind of explain the features and benefits of doing that. And then different sports have different numbers. So We will be following up with the students who are in the alt fall, if approved, in the alt fall seasons, to explain kind of the process and the limitations of those things. So those were kind of two updates that we wanted to give you, and we also wanted to give you the opportunity to ask questions.
Start with Kevin. Any questions for Mike?
Thanks, Mike, for the summary. Only question I had is the 2 adult, if you go to the previous slide, if someone can flip, the 2 adult is no matter if it's outdoor or indoor, right?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, that's all I had. Thank you.
Okay. Fred.
I don't have any questions. Thanks, Mike, for the update. I'm actually glad to see the removal of the non-school sports requirement. I think it's time to take that out, and I'm in support of that. So I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Any questions of Mike?
No questions, thank you.
Jim?
Mike, you mentioned that that they need to get prior approval. Just out of curiosity, why is that?
That's a WIA policy and a mandate. It's also it also helps with the conflict of, let's say we have a game scheduled and then we have 14 kids that want to play in a club event that weekend. We try to eliminate those conflicts as much as we can, and we also need to know ahead of time so we can. So that's a WIA rule, and that's a WIA process.
So that's on a per competition, not a per sport, but a per competition requirement?
Can you ask that question a little bit differently?
Yes. So if we want to make sure that we have sufficient numbers to play, it sounds like each time we play, you have to ask for permission so that we can confirm we have enough to play that game. Is that the way it works?
Yep. That would be one of the reasons, yes.
Okay, so it's not approval of an outside sport and an in-school sport. It's whether there's a conflict of which one you are attending. Is that it?
It's approval to participate in a non-school competition during your competition season.
Okay.
So if we're let's say if we're in the track season and somebody wants to do a track event during the track season, they would need to have school approval to do that with a non-school entity.
Okay. All right. I was just curious how that worked, if it was event by event or sport by sport. Thank you.
It's sport by sport and event by event, and there's a process and a form that we have to fill out and send to Stephen's point.
Okay. Thank you.
Krista, anything?
I think just to follow up on that, I think the WIA made that rule, and it goes back to our sports task force as well, that they want to have that rule in terms of eligibility. So what sports and what organizations are kids playing for, but then also in terms of overuse injuries and kids playing in 3 different sports. So at least there's a conversation piece that occurs for that. So I think, that's part of the reason why the WIA did that, and I'm glad we're following that rule. So I'm supportive of this as well.
Mike, what you're requesting is to remove what is our current prohibition on our high school students who are participating in WIA sports from also participating in non-school, that is club sports, right?
That's correct. And I do have another slide. I apologize. I think this is some really important information that I think you need to know. And I'm sorry I didn't ask Dr. Bergstrom to click ahead. For our school sports to continue to be successful, we need to continue to do some of the things that we've done. So when we put this policy in place during the winter and the fall seasons, it wasn't because we wanted to limit opportunities, it's because we wanted to limit exposure. And we have had, in the last couple of weeks, we have had students either in quarantine or test positive due to a bunch of factors, but including club sports. It's not to say that club sports are more dangerous or not. It's just, again, limiting exposure and putting kids in, putting them in situations where they're closer than 6 feet. So that was the reason why we did it. We were very successful. We didn't miss any games. So I just wanted to make that clear. But I think the other things we have to continue to do is we have to continue to mask. We have to continue to do distance as much as we can. We're still doing the health screeners, and that has gone better and is getting better. But we have to limit gatherings on and off campus. And I think people have to kind of buy into that because the role of our off-court choices by families is critical. And I think that was from the medical working group. So I think, again, we weren't trying to limit opportunities. We were trying to limit exposure. So the more you play, the more you're within 6 feet of somebody, the more chances you have. So that was the intent of where we were going. I want the board to be clear about that, because it wasn't something we were trying to be punitive on.
Did that give rise to any other questions from the board? Don't see any. Okay, so Mike is requesting for us to consider removing the prohibition on our WIAA athletes from participating in non-school club sports subject to following WIAA rules. So that he's requesting a motion along those lines. Okay, I think Troy jumped in.
That's fine.
Troy with the motion, Krista with the second.
Sure.
Do you have the motion down?
I believe so.
Okay, it would be to permit WIA athletes to participate in non-club, or non-school, that is club sports, subject to WIA rules.
Got it.
Mike, is that accurate with what you're requesting?
Yeah, and I also just I don't know if you need to make a motion on the fan limit or not, but I just wanted you to be aware of that. It kind of coincides with what we've done in the past, so that's not much of a difference.
Okay, and the fan limit would be what number, again, are you requesting specifically?
2 home or 2 away, like we've
Okay.
done in the past.
Okay. Let's do we got a motion on the table right now. Let's deal with that one, and then we'll get to the fan limit one. We've got a motion second. Anna, any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm just in the memo here. One of the things that it describes is requesting authority to make adjustments as necessary moving forward. This is a moving situation and a changing situation and a dynamic situation. And I feel like the best way for the administrative team to be flexible in how they approach it should be an administrative level decision. Unless it's going against some sort of public health restriction or some sort of guideline, I guess I would like to be able to put the authority to the administrative team on future changes to this as we see this go forward. So would that require a friendly amendment or an amendment to the motion on the table?
Or a separate motion?
The motion right now is to permit students to participate in club sports if they're participating in WIAA sports, subject to WIAA rule. That allows them to do that. I think the administration, subject to that power, has the authority to limit it depending on circumstances.
So you don't think there's a need for the motion to
Not in this
reflect that?
motion.
I don't think so in this motion.
Okay.
So I got a motion and a second. Kevin, any questions or comments on the motion on the table?
No, I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit difficulty hearing, but I think we're going to handle the potential for any modifications in a separate motion versus amending this. We want to stick to voting on approving what we're looking at on the screen right here, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. No questions.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. We got a motion and a second. Call the roll.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Maring?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Zach,
Yes, motion carries 6-0. And there's a second motion that's being sought, that is to limit the number of participants. I have a motion from the floor on that.
I'll move that we follow the recommendation that Mike laid out and give him the latitude as things change to follow the spirit of those guidelines.
A second.
Any questions?
This is Kevin. Sorry.
Kevin?
Go ahead, Tim. Did you call me Steve?
No change from our current policy.
Krista?
No, it's a motion to, so Leslie, if you go to
Let's
the
make
slide
this
before.
clear. Yes,
No, one before.
slide before. Slide
This
before.
one?
No,
Okay.
next one.
Yes, so this is, the motion is to follow these guidelines, but Mike has the latitude if public health order changes or that he has the latitude to make those decisions within the spirit of these guidelines.
So that's what it is.
Okay, so okay, the motion is to follow the guidelines that are set forth before us right now. Katie, in the motion, you'll indicate what those are. Those are to limit spectators in attendance, to follow the guidelines in Dane County, that each student's allowed to bring 2 adults to their event, that general admission at the sporting events will not be allowed, no student fan section, and no concessions sold at any event, and that the administration has the discretion to modify these depending on Dane County rules and or circumstances that arise. Is that the subject of your motion?
Yes.
Do we have a second for that? I didn't get it. Anna had the second on that. Kevin, with that clarification, any comments or questions?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the motion as is. I mean, and Mike, I'm sure will consider this, but just thinking with the outdoor larger latitude, and I know like with football, obviously you have a lot of players, so you multiply the number of players times 2, you have probably close to the number, if my math is correct. So my only discussion point, it's not really a discussion point, but point in general is that things continue to improve. Per the latitude Krista mentioned in her motion, that we would consider, you know, I just think of siblings and things like that to see their brothers or sisters play sports, to have some latitude, at least in outdoor situations, if the numbers work out. So not a motion, not an amendment, just a comment.
Tim and Chris, anything from your end? Troy or Anna?
No, okay.
No? And I would suspect as we move forward that if things change, Mike will come back, and if the board needs to take any action, they will at that time. All right, could you call the roll? We got a motion and a second.
Ms. Flanagan,
Yes.
Ms. Bijak,
Yes.
Mr. Maring,
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz,
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun,
Yes.
Mr. Zach.
Yes, motion carries 6-0. Mike, have we completed the items that you wanted us to consider this evening?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for your work on this, and thanks for all the work you're doing to getting our co-curricular activities up and running.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Moves us to discussion items D, committee reports. Anything from policy this evening, Anna?
No report.
Anything from visioning?
No report.
All right. Takes us to information items. We've, first up is mental health update. And Leslie, is this yours?
Actually, it's Dr. Weiden's.
Okay, Candace, you're up.
She is beginning, and she's going to tell me when she wants me to move the slide, and here we go.
All right.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for letting me present on this topic tonight. Our first slide is not a super positive one. We've talked a lot this year. We've heard a lot about mental health needs. This has been an increasing trend for a few years. This slide in particular is from 2019 and reflects administrators' concerns across the country for increasing mental health needs of our students. Leslie can go on. This one is from the Pew Research, is from 2018, and that reflects some pretty significant numbers for students with significant anxiety and depression concerns at a level of 70% in that particular one. The graphic on the right looks at it a little differently, and this is from 2021, and you can kind of see the different data that's on that screen. But really for me, what drew me most to this particular slide was the number of students, even in places that have very good access to mental health, only 1 in 3 students who need mental health services are getting them. So there's a large number of students who are experiencing mental health issues, primarily in the form of anxiety and depression. And a lot of those kids are not getting support. So, we expected to hear from the Dane County Youth Survey tonight, and I'm sad that data isn't available. We do anticipate that the results of that will corroborate this kind of information for our school district as well. Amy was able to share a little bit with us verbally to give us just a sneak preview in our mental health committee. So we do think that our numbers of students experiencing anxiety and depression are going to be following sort of this trend of increasing mental health needs. So it's not all bad news, and you can go on to the next one, Leslie. But I did want to share that information with you. So we will be wanting to address all of that information. And the good news is that there are things that we can do. We know that when we are sharing the social emotional learning, the zones of regulation, those self-regulation, self-awareness strategies, those are things that can help. Our positive behavior interventions and supports work that we're doing in school, those are things that can help. And the main thing that we know that's critical is the relationship building that we have with our staff members and our students. So we know that building those relationships with students and parents can foster the safe place in our schools where that can put students in a place where they can learn. So it's not all bad news. We are doing some good things in that direction, and I'll share a little bit more about that. But first, I want to share an example of what it looks like when we know it's working. Hopefully, we're going to share that video with you.
Turn the volume down on your computer, Leslie.
Little 21-second clip is Big Brother teaching Little Brother how to breathe through his motions. I know, it's really, really cute and a really excellent example of what we are trying to do through our universal SEL strategies.
Well, hopefully you can click on it sometime on your own and be able to see it. It really is a stunning example of what's being taught in schools, and for that little guy to not just have learned it, to be able to say, yes, I know that material, but to take it in and to then demonstrate it and help his little brother through it. And so it really just is a quite lovely picture of what our social emotional learning supports can do for kids. So thank you, John. Our process is to follow the equitable multi-level systems of support approach. And so for that, you've heard me talk before about our tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. You can advance the slide, Leslie. Levels of support. So for example, at our universal level, this is what everybody gets, right? It's the surveys that we send out to all students. It is the mental health assessments that we give to all students, the screenings, the social emotional learning that happens across the board. And for K-6, that includes the zones of regulation as well. In tier 2 is when we have students who may need some additional support. So they may need typically some reteaching on behavior expectations, for example, or they participate in a counseling group. This year, we're seeing a lot of coping and stress groups happening, and some groups related to social isolation. And then in tier 3 It's again, a more specialized situation where they need more individualized support. Again, they maybe are still needing some reteaching, or they need some individual supports like counseling through us or through our mental health partners. Some of the things that we're doing at that, it's been a while probably since we've shown you the Castle graphic, but the social emotional learning standards are consistent with this graphic. So you have your self-awareness, self-management, relationship skills, all of those things in that graphic on the right. And some of the things that we're doing are having those social emotional learning lessons K-12. And it's really been working so far. Our coaches, we have 2 coaches, and they are helping to promote social emotional learning at each school, at each grade level. Again, we do the zones of regulation at the K-6 level, and that is teaching kids how to be aware of where their body is and what they need in order to be in a better learning space. And the Hope Squad, you've seen probably in the Observer recently an article on the Hope Squad. So that's something also that we've been doing, is trying to help peers be available and aware to help their own peers. And then the social justice standards have been being integrated into our social emotional learning, and our coaches are also doing professional development and staff training on social emotional learning so that we can continue to integrate it across the board. This is a graphic that just sort of shows the roles of our student services staff. So we have school psychologists in every building, we have school counselors in every building, and we have 2 social workers across the district. And you can see on this that they all have some things that overlap, some responsibilities that overlap. And then there are specialty areas that they all have. So for example, the school social workers are typically most responsible for some of that outreach to parents and community building within our parents. That's an area where we are perhaps a little lighter than we'd like to be. So here's our current staffing level, and it's divided by what we have at each school and what is shared. And what I would say is that one of the things that we appreciate most about what the board has approved in the past are the increases in counselor positions. Previously, we had at Rome Corners and the middle school, each had a counselor, and then there was a shared counselor. And that was a very challenging situation to be able to serve students well. When someone had to travel, it was harder for that person who was traveling to be able to build the relationships with the staff, to build the relationships with the students, and to be there when the students actually needed them. So one of the best things that the board has done is to increase that counselor time in both buildings. Now they don't travel, they can provide better services to students and to families. That's true for the high school as well. The increase in counselor position at the high school has allowed, and the increase in the administration as well, has allowed for those neighborhood teams to be more responsive and to be able to really work on not just the responsive mental health needs, but the ACP work that they need to do as well. So it's a little tighter, and it's a little more manageable, and we don't have that person, we don't have as much of a shortage in that area at the high school. We do still have some shared positions, and those are with respect to the social worker at the high school, that position is a 0.5 social worker. It's also 0.5 AOD coordinator, and that's a shared position with the middle school. That puts us again in one of those situations where it's not ideal in terms of being able to service well either building, whereas if we had the social worker at the high school and one at the middle school, you don't have to worry about when does the crisis occur. You're there when the students need you. You're there to build the relationships, that kind of a thing. So this is a slide of our current partners with our mental health providers. We have Oregon Mental Health and Lake City Counseling have been longstanding partners with us. Over the course of the last year, they've served 100 of our students. We don't, that it's fairly consistent with last year, a little bit of an increase in the students that they're seeing. We also have had some additional community mental health providers, Positive Insights, for example, who has been part of our mental health committee this year. And they're reporting some increases in seeing students as well with anxiety. One of the things that has changed a little bit with our partners this year has been the willingness to share information. Some of our parents have not been as open to sharing information with the school staff, student services staff, as they have typically because of that, the difference in schooling this year. So we hope next year to be able to get back to a place where we can work in a more coordinated fashion and be better able to serve the students who are getting that outside mental health support as well. They have not started seeing a lot of kids back in the buildings yet. That's something that we'll see more next year. They're seeing some students on site if the online teletherapy isn't working very well for the family, then they're coming in and seeing kids. But for the most part, they're still doing virtual therapy. We also have some partnerships with Face Kids and a Grace who will send in somebody to do some groups with us. Usually that is for our CBITS groups to co-facilitate those or to co-facilitate some grief groups. And then of course we have our Building Bridges, which is a Dane County program that provides us with social workers for short-term mental health supports. So those are all super important partnerships for us. So where we see some opportunities are where we've done some data collection. So we have done some well checks throughout the year, at the beginning of the year and mid-year. At the beginning of the year with parents, mid-year with students, and then we've done our CBITS at 6th grade at both Forest Edge and Rome Corners and at the high school. And then we did the best screener at grade 3, which was asking for parental input this year. And we plan on doing another survey, mental health survey at the 7th grade level when we get back from spring break. And then of course we have the Dane County Youth Survey, which we'll be getting that information more formally later. We also, as a committee, have done the mental health needs assessment. We started this a few years ago, back when Leslie was my co-facilitator on the committee. We started this work. So we have the K4, the 5 through 8 and 9 through 12 student services and mental health committee go through the needs assessment planning guide. And it looks at, where did we see ourselves lacking? What did we have partially in place? What did we want to get to fully in place for some of these items? What are the gaps in services that we're finding? And what are the priorities then in establishing the next goals that we have for our department and for our committee? Some of the major themes that came from that needs assessment is that we need to continue to work on trauma-sensitive practices in our school buildings. We need to increase our connections with families. Where we've been able to do that, that's a positive connection. We can work together to help the students. And so we want to be able to do that. We want to continue to integrate our social emotional learning into the universal curriculum. So it's not a separate isolated lesson. We want to start making sure that we can integrate that throughout our curriculum. And we want to ensure that our supports are culturally sensitive. And we also think that we need to continue to focus on prevention for suicide, for bullying, and for AOD. We do anticipate that we'll see some better data on our alcohol and drug use, perhaps as a result of the confinement that kids were in this year. So we want to make sure that we can try to keep that trajectory low, even if it's just a result of that, if we can figure out some ways to keep that from going back up in use. So we come to some recommendations. We are seeking, as you'll see in Gina's report on the staffing later on, we're asking for an increase of 2 social work positions. And as I said earlier, we would like to be able to not have some of these really high impact positions be shared across buildings. So if we were to increase our staffing by 2 social work positions, that would allow us to have a full social worker at the high school and a full social worker at the middle school. And then we would also be able to have 2 social workers split across the elementary buildings. So instead of having 1 social worker trying to meet the needs of all 5 buildings, we would have 2 to split across the 5 buildings. We believe that this would allow for better time on the social emotional supports across the district and at all tiers, the universal, the secondary, and the tertiary tiers of our MLSS system. We also would feel like we could spend a little greater emphasis and focus on AOD, on trauma-sensitive practices, and on those anti-bullying issues, and that we would see improved outcomes for our families and students. We would want to spend a little time on attendance and truancy. Some of these things have been a little different this year, so our baseline for looking at some of the behavioral data and some of the truancy data is going to be a little different this year than it is in typical years, but we do think that those are areas that we would be able to work more cohesively at. We also, you can flip, Leslie. We also have been, our student services group has been the group that has tried to work with staff and making sure that we continue to have a healthy staff on compassion, resilience, on leading onward book studies and those types of things that we're trying to maintain that healthy perspective of our teachers and staff as well. So I just wanted to mention that as part of their current structure, but also something that we would continue to do. And they do it for families as well. And they're very excited about being able to do that work with our families and give some of that compassion, resilience strategies to our parents. So typically the board asks for how are we going to know what are our measures of success and how are we going to know our impact. So we hope that we will be able to see some impact in some of our survey data, that we will be able to begin to see some of those higher numbers, even if it's just a COVID bump that have made it higher, that will start to have an impact on reducing those numbers in our surveys for students who are experiencing anxiety and depression. And also really, more importantly, is whether or not we see those numbers go down, but maybe we see a change in that gap from who is accessing services. So if we're closing that gap, so if you need a service, you're accessing it, you can get the support that you need. We'd like to see that go down a little bit. We are investing in a measure called Panorama, and we're going to be directly measuring our students' learning in social emotional standards. So we are going to be starting that this spring and assessing kids from grades 3 through 12 on what they know already about the social emotional learning standards. And then we'll take that information this summer and take a look at it and see what areas of focus we need to work on, what needs to be continued, just kind of be able to assess that data and compare it to some of our other data that we've collected. Ultimately, we'd hope to be able to see decreased behavioral data from the principal's office. Again, the baseline data this year is a little bit out of whack because, we haven't had the kids in the building as much. So we would hope, though, that we would be able to see some increase in collaborative problem solving that would reduce it, increase in Plan Bs that would result in reduced numbers to the office, that we would be able to see some implementation of SBIRT, so some short-term goal-oriented plans that are like, focused on reduced AOD use or reduced classroom disruptions, that kind of a thing. So we hope to be able to affect the office referral situation as well. Ultimately, we'd like to see lower numbers in terms of bullying and harassment. We know right now from the data that any data that we've had, we've been able to see that the numbers of kids who are being reported are in certain subgroups, right? So it might be race, it might be disability, it might be gender identity. Those are our higher areas of bullying and harassment, and we'd certainly want to work on reducing that. And then, of course, the anecdotal evidence, like hopefully you'll be able to get to see the little guy that was in the video earlier. But we also have evidence of that happening with our own administrators and colleagues of examples where they're seeing their kids being able to come home and talk about or practice the skills that they've learned from social emotional learning lessons. So some of that self-regulation is happening, and we hope to be able to see it across the board with all of our kids, even if it takes more than one try at it. So those are kind of our measures of success that we're hoping to be able to see. And again, I just want to say thank you. I mean, again, I would say that, you know, I can't say it enough that the increases that you've given us in the counselor area has been super impactful. And I would see that we would expect that to be impactful in that same way with our social work requests. So thank you very much for considering.
Great presentation, Candace. We're going to walk around the room for questions if we have any. Krista, questions or comments?
Yeah, I just have some questions and comments. One, you know, like I said, I've been on this board for 5 years, and one of the things that I am most proud of is the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we've invested over the last 5 to 10 years on mental health. We know that if kids are not healthy, they're not going to learn. And so when I hear comments about why are you not just focusing on reading and writing, I think it's so important that people understand that kids don't learn to read and write if they're not in a healthy mental space. And so that's why we do this SEL work. And it's so important. And, you know, I can see as a parent where I have a daughter that's in college who we didn't start this SEL when she was young. And I have a younger child that's 5 years younger who had this work. And just the ability to self-regulate and manage. And as we headed into a pandemic, I don't think we realized how much we gifted our kids with these skills. And so I think that gets into one of the things that you said you wanted to have a improvement area is increased connections with families. And so how, you know, what are some of your suggestions, or how can the board help from a perspective of not only when a child is in crisis, but how can we bring parents along in this SEL learning? Because as an adult, you know, I'm starting meditation or whatever, and that's my way to learn this, but we never learned it as kids. And so, Candace, how do we bring parents along in this journey that helps them understand our values and the well-roundedness of education? It's not just the subjects, it's also this SEL.
Well, I think there's a variety of ways that we try to do that. I think some of the ways that we've tried to connect with parents this year, and we would continue to do, are to create some parent groups so that we're actually sharing with them some of the strategies that we're teaching the kids. So some of that direct groups for the parents, some instructional kinds of things, and how they can support the kids' learning as well. I think, you know, when we're thinking about that outreach to parents, doing it earlier, right now, a lot of times we're ending up reaching out to parents and problem solving with them when we're in a crisis mode. We want to be able to do that in an earlier fashion. So, you know, just some of those offerings to get parents involved and encouraged to come in earlier and work with us on problem solving before we get to crisis level. And again, just teaching some of the parents the strategies that we're doing. There are some connections that, for example, I think it's called screenagers, but there are some things that the AOD group in particular is working on that will bring in the community to work on some of those kind of things. So I think it would just be some effort on our part to reach out earlier and to bring in parents and to educate them on what we're teaching so that they can reinforce the skills at home. I agree with you. We probably weren't taught these things early enough when we were in school ourselves. So.
And then my only other comment is I found it very fascinating when you talked about bullying, you know, related to the top three are race, gender identity, and disability. And I think that's very relevant to what we're talking about with our anti-hate speech and the work that we're doing, is that we know that those kids tend to be targeted more. And so that makes in terms of a mental health perspective, that makes our equity work even more important. So thank you for pointing that out. That's it for me.
Tim.
Candace, we've been seeing the Building Bridges program year after year for a number of years now, and I know that provides us some counselors in our schools. Is that just for a specific program, or does that allow us to use those extra counselors as we bring kids back, for instance, where there may be more of a triage experience because we haven't seen those kids and now we are? Can we use those Building Bridges counselors beyond the program they're funded for or not?
Well, we are using them, and the Building Bridges provides us with 2 social workers, one that focuses on the home piece and one that focuses on more of the school piece. And they are to provide us with support for short-term crisis. So it's 90 days of time that they can work with a student. And this year, actually, Building Bridges, last year we had gone down to like 12 per semester, and with some pretty tight parameters on when we could refer, when we needed to have those referrals in by, that kind of a thing. This year was actually a little bit loosened up a little bit so that we could increase beyond the 12 students for a semester. And so we did. We had 15 students that we referred to Building Bridges in our first semester. I think we had a family that it didn't work out for and they dropped, but so we have been using them. They are helpful in terms of getting our parents some of that outside support that they need to access. And the flexibility has extended into the second semester. So we do have referrals that are still happening. We'll have a deadline in April for those referrals now. But we have continued to refer to our Building Bridges social workers so that they could have that support. We have had a few more than typical re-referrals into the program. So parents who have needed support for more than just that 90 days, that we then have used that spot to support that family again for the second time. So we've had a few of those this semester as well. So we are using them. It is just more of that short-term crisis support to get them access to what they need kind of immediately. And then the intent is to sort of hand it off to us so that we can follow up with the students once those supports are in place.
Thank you. Now that we are having kids coming back to school, I would imagine we are going to become more aware of issues that we've missed simply because they haven't been in school. Is there a way for us to, either through a Dane County program or through some program where we can kind of get a peak time support for the remainder of the school year to kind of level things, to kind of get that new awareness under control quickly before summer arrives?
Yes, I think that one of the things that we're looking at right now is just the availability of additional partners in the community. So for example, our newest partner at our mental health committee, if she can maybe do some support for us. We have some counselors who have said, we have some other community members who are our social workers or our counselors that want to also help. So maybe we can pull in some of those people to help us get through kind of a period where we might anticipate some additional needs.
And just as Krista mentioned, you know, we just over this last 10 years, 5 years even, we've gone from, you know, having kids come through our high school being more self-aware, more social, emotional learners. And so we've got this short-term gap for parents to understand how valuable that is. Is there something that we can grab onto that will allow us to bring parents along who are in that gap? At some point, we're going to graduate kids who have really gained in their awareness using social emotional learning. But until then, we got to bring the parents along just like we're bringing the kids along. Is there some way for us to do that in the short term until we start creating more parents essentially who are more aware socially and emotionally?
Yeah, I think, you know, some of the things that SEL coaches and our counselors and social workers are doing are some of those PTO presentations, are doing some webinars for parents so that we can encourage them to have the same material and have that same learning. And hopefully, actually, hopefully they're learning from their kids that are coming home and practicing these skills that they're learning and talking about it with their parents. I hope that we're seeing some of that carry over as well. But definitely we, I would say it's an area for us to grow in, and how we can bring the parents along, and a place where we would try to make some plans to do so.
And thank you for all the work. I know there's so many recommendations here. It's hard to get a grasp on everything and how it affects the short and the long term. So I appreciate you kind of organizing them for my thoughts, if nothing else. Thank you.
Thanks to Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Candace, for a good presentation, giving us an update here. Great questions and comments already. I guess Tim was kind of going down this line, but just another point of clarification. The third-party support, I know there's some specific expertise, maybe a Grace as an example with, grief counseling. But in general, are some of the resources used a capacity issue, or are there specific areas of expertise or unique areas of mental health that they're filling, or is the answer yes to all the above?
Yes to all the above. But for example, some of our data indicates that anxiety is one of our bigger issues. So if we have a provider that has expertise specifically in childhood anxiety, that would be someone we would bring on more quickly than someone who didn't have that expertise, for example.
Sure. How do we benchmark versus other communities? I hope everyone on the board, I know they agree with me, and I hope the public agrees that this is an area we should be leading in for sure with the challenges. And it's not an easy time to be a kid, and even over and above that, after we get through this period of history, we know these type of mental health issues are only continuing to increase. How do we benchmark versus other communities in terms of the resources per number of kids? And I know there's a quality component there that isn't taken into account with the question, but on pure numbers, just curious, Candace.
Well, we have greater staff than some communities, and we have less than some. I was doing a comparable, and I didn't get all of the districts in Dane County actually in, so I didn't share that with you tonight. But I would say, we're fairly similar to Wanakee in terms of our numbers. They're a little bit different in their balance. So they have a couple of fewer counselors, but more social workers, for example. So for the comparable districts, we tend to be lighter on the social work side and maybe more on the counselor side, but I think that was to some degree with intent, right? Because as I said, we had a couple of spots that we specifically wanted more counselors in, and I think those were good decisions. Now, if we could bump up the social worker piece, we'd certainly be on par with many of the districts in Dane County. For example, I don't know exactly what Verona has. My guess is they have more across the board than we do, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, Sun Prairie, for example, has probably more social workers than other positions. So.
Right. Last question, just a curiosity. The Panorama tool sounds really like a positive step. Do we have currently data-driven polling or that we do with kids now, or is this a new thing? Because it seems like it's a great step in the right direction.
Yes, it will be new for us. We haven't been measuring social emotional learning in this way. So it will be sort of like, it's like an achievement test for anything else. It will be measuring the student's achievement. And then if we, at varying levels of cost, you can get more to your program, right? So if we wanted to add surveys for other things for the community or whatever, for parents on social emotional learning, we could certainly add that in. But this is the first step we want to take is actually measuring with the students, what are they learning in terms of the social emotional standards. So it'll be the first time we do it. It will be this spring.
Great. Well, thanks for all the hard work you and your team does in this incredibly important area. So my thanks to all of you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
I'll hold my staffing specific questions till the next agenda item, but kind of taking on to Tim's comments about really looking at that gap between our reported needs and those students that are actually accessing services. And I'm just kind of thinking about the next 3 months here when as we finish out this school year, you know, within 3 weeks, we're going to have more frequent contact for our 712s where we'll be seeing students 4 times a week. And I know that was some of the big rationale when we brought K2s, when we started K2s at 4 days a week, and that we wanted to have that more frequent contact, you know, as this being part of the reason. So I guess I don't know if there's a question here, but I'm just thinking, you know, the next 3 months, are there other things that we can do as a district? I mean, my assumption is that as we do go to 4 days of contact per week, that we are going to be able to identify more. Kids will be accessing services more. But are there other things that we can do to help promote that? You know, maybe over and above what we would do in a normal scenario.
For not having a question in there, that was a really hard question. You know, I think that we want to continue to just try to build those relationships back with students and to encourage our parents to work with us in terms of sharing information so that we can be on the same page with how providers and parents in the school are responding to students. I think the mentorship things that are happening at Room Corners and other places are really great and are good ways to also support our students. So I think all of those things are additional supports. And then if we can bring on, you know, if we can make sure that our community providers are, you know, don't have waiting lists and can handle what we have to refer, then I think that will be a start.
Okay. Thank you, Ken. That's all I have.
Couple of questions that haven't been asked, so that makes me feel good. Can you tell me in general, and maybe it's confidential, I'm not sure, but do you know across the district what percentage of students we have falling in a tier 2 or a tier 3 category? Just in general, do we know how many kids are in those, or what percentage of our student body is getting those additional measures?
We do have that information, so it would be, you know, how many there are, you know, how many groups at each individual school, and we would have that information. I don't know that I could flip it to you off the top of my head tonight, but we do have, of course, numbers of groups that we're running in each of the buildings. And for example, I was observing a group today of seven students, and so in that particular group there were 7. They were running that one a couple of different times a week. So we certainly could tell you how many students are participating in groups. We also have data to suggest, like at the middle school there's 100 this is ballpark, about 181 students who are seen regularly for a check-in. The high school, a couple of the high school counselors have said, like, one of them has seen over 500 students so far for various appointments and meetings. One of them was over 600. So there is information regarding the contacts that they're making and the amount of groups that they're providing. I didn't have that level of detail for you tonight, but certainly we have that.
Okay, and that's okay. I kind of wanted to gauge where we were as a district as far as, you know, what percentage of our students are requiring some of those higher level services. But I guess another question related to that to some extent is, you know, whether we've seen those rise or fall. I mean, I think probably from what I'm hearing, we're probably seeing them rise and not necessarily fall, but perhaps as we make these investments and this additional I guess, work in social emotional learning and mental health resources, that we are going to start seeing some shifts on some of those measures of success that you talked about. So I guess the question would be a little bit, you mentioned that adding some of those counselors has been very impactful, and I'm sure from a resource perspective, it's made it much more manageable for staff to manage the number of students they're seeing or dealing with and the situations they have. But I guess I'm also wondering if we have seen any shifts or trends in some of those measures of success that you identified, based on what we have done, or if we're kind of seeing it. I guess I'll leave it at that.
Well, what I can tell you is that for this year, the numbers have not decreased by any significant margins, and in some places they've increased. But the focus of the service has changed to some degree. So where you might have spent a lot of time in teaching or reteaching or addressing a behavior issue, this year has been more of the social isolation, the coping, the stress management, those kinds of things. So not a difference in the numbers of students being seen, but a difference in what they were being seen for happened this year. So, I mean, that it does make this year's data a little bit trickier to think about how it's going to be reduced from. I mean, so ideally, we see those reductions back to a pre-COVID level, at least for anxiety and depression. But again, my hope is that the emphasis that we've had on mental health and just the idea that it's okay to need support will help to decrease that gap between those who identify as having significant worry or depression and those who are needing to have some level of service and haven't gotten it yet. I hope that to me would be our greatest measure of success, if we could have that gap be reduced.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess I'll just kind of leave this with one last comment, and that is I 100% agree with what Krista described early on, that if we don't have healthy minds of our learners and our students, that we are not going to see academic achievement. We're not going to see learning happen. And so 100% support the idea of investing in mental health and making sure that we have students who can be engaged and ready to learn because they're mentally happy and healthy. And I just think it's really great and a tremendous amount of work, and a huge thank you to you and your team for all that you're doing, especially this year, but every year that you're managing all of this amazing work. So thank you so much for all that you're doing.
Thank you. The thanks all really do go to the student services staff. They've been working really hard and doing a great job. And honestly, to a person, everyone appreciates the investment in student support that you guys have given us. So we appreciate that.
Thank you. This has been over the last couple of years a regular item on our agenda, and it's usually taken place in the context of the upcoming staffing report and our budgetary considerations. And we usually tie it to the Dane County Youth Survey because they all tie together. And sorry we didn't get to see the survey tonight because that data provides us with information as to the need. Historically, 20 years ago, these were not items we talked about. They weren't, I don't think, generally recognized as really the function of the school district, okay? And that's greatly evolved in 20 years where we now recognize as a value of this district the whole child, and that not only are we as a district charged with the responsibility of forging our academic progress of our students, but also their social and emotional progress with that. And you have seen over the years an evolution of that. We recognize that to have significant student achievement, that gets driven by our curriculum, the delivery of that, the assessment of that, but then there are these external factors that stand in the way of that. And over the years, we have tried to determine how best to approach those external factors to take that hurdle away from learning that occurs in the school. So I remember we started, Steve and Ann Staten, with the Search Institute and asset building, and we had a community organization by the name of BOAT. And we floated our boat, building our assets together. And then we remember we had the tree with the roots underneath and developing our staff that way. But it was very rudimentary. Amy Miller and the group worked really hard. And then when we saw the slide tonight about all the support staff that we now have in that social emotional learning that's so critical is a vast difference, okay? But I think we all recognize, and the community values the whole child character trait of our district, how important that is to the district. And so, this is a prelude to our budgetary talk. We're going to get a staffing plan tonight that will have some suggestions for that. And then we start building our budget based upon that. And, one important component of that will be the realization that the social emotional learning aspect of it is important as anything else we do in this district to help our children leave here to meet their potential. So Candace, thanks. And you've been working on this for a long time with us, and I hope you're as proud as I am and the rest of the board how far we've come to deliver this area of student need.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. That ends our talk on the mental health update, and as I indicated, that brings us to our staffing report. We scheduled, this was supposed to be an off night for us, and we scheduled tonight because we had a lot of stuff to do, and in particular, get the report tonight. This is not an action item, but we always give this report so that the board has a chance to assimilate the information in here, ask questions tonight, but also to review it over the next couple of weeks so that when we come on April 12th, we'll be in a position to approve it, okay? And that's the beginning process in what Andy needs to start building our budget for next year. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Bergstrom.
And with that, I will be turning it over to Gina Adjournment, because it is Gina and Andy who are discussing the staffing needs tonight.
Hi, Gina.
So my goal tonight is, okay, I feel like I want to stand.
No, you gotta talk louder.
All right, so Katie just keeps giving me the thumbs up. So our goal tonight is really to share our best thinking from our team in terms of staffing, really to balance our student needs with what we know is going to be a difficult budget. And so with that, to talk about how we do that as a team, we have guiding principles that our team works with that were reaffirmed by the board in 2016. And so we always look to class size. The board has given us guidelines that we try to achieve for our class sizes, and that's K3, 22 students or fewer, grades 4 through 6, 25 or fewer, and then 7, 12, it is somewhat a function of what classes students select, but we try to keep those around 25 as well. Then we also look at, particularly for special education, the guidelines that DPI gives to us in terms of caseload, as well as balancing our student needs and making sure we can meet those individual needs that are found in IEPs and in 504 plans. Then we also look at the open enrollment that was approved by the board in January. And we always look at how do we meet the needs of a whole child while being fiscally responsible. We look at our kindergarten numbers to make sure that we have, we can somewhat estimate what our kindergarten sections will look like based on prior data and growth in our district. So really we try to look at the whole picture when it comes to staffing, but as you know, we're in spring. And so we have particular growth in our district in spring and summer as people buy houses. And what we hear from realtors and people in the community is that people buy their houses here with the school district in mind. That is something that draws people to our community. So with that, I gave you the most recent picture we have on our enrollment data. So you will see here in terms of the table, we give you the second Friday, because those are the most recent counts that we have affirmed with DPI, but then also wanted to give you a snapshot of where we are right now in terms of kids who are actually enrolled in our district. So I really want to highlight for you the 4K and the kindergarten numbers, because these are students that have told us right now that they're coming. So if you look at, we're already up in 4K from our second January count, and we are trending higher in kindergarten because we typically have about 35 to 50 kindergartners who enroll with us in the summer months. So that is something that we always watch, is our 4K and our kindergarten enrollment over the summer. So looking at our enrolled students and planning those class sizes, I will talk to you about what our recommendation is from our team. But first I wanted Andy to share the budget picture with you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Andy.
Thank you. So we're in March, and there's a lot that we don't know, but we're working through the different components of the budget. The biggest thing is obviously the state component. And obviously they're starting to do hearings and that type of thing. And we've seen you've heard of the governor's proposal. We haven't heard the legislatures yet, but we have started thinking about what the targets are in that. We've put together kind of a big picture budget. What we tried to do is identify anything that's $10,000 either more on the revenue or on the expenditure side, and try to just quantify that so that we know what it's out there. So that said, we'll start with kind of the additional student revenue cap impact. Now, you wouldn't think counting students is a hard thing, but let me tell you, it's very difficult. There are resident students, there are open enrolled students, there is membership, there is all kinds of different components to this. We're talking about our 3-year membership in this top category here. And so it is a 3-year rolling average. And what we are projecting right now is an increase of 50 over last September. The problem, or one of the issues that we have, is the 167 is actually only represents about a 15 student increase on the average, because we last year's summer school number was significantly lower than normal, about 40 FTE lower than normal, just because we weren't able to provide a very robust program. That summer FTE is factored into our revenue. So we have an increase of students we're anticipating here, but we already have a kind of a hard number that we have to swallow in our 3-year average. I will say that the governor's proposal is to use the higher of the number that was from the prior year or last year, which would probably be the prior year from everybody. So that could help us out if that were adopted by the legislature. So lots of unknowns right now, but right now we feel fairly confident about $167,000 related to growth. We have to grow, kind of compensate for that summer school FTE, as well as a little bit of reduction that we've had this school year. We fully expect those students to come back to us, and we're already hearing about that right now. The next item is really related to the state budget completely. And what we're talking about there is the increase in the revenue limit, or, and it depends on who's in power in the state of Wisconsin, where the money comes from, but we kind of treat them the same. Or in the categorical reimbursement, the per student reimbursement that we did. So regardless of which one it comes from, we're anticipating $100. In the last state budget, we actually received $200. So the $100 is kind of a low number, but based on some of the rhetoric that we've heard at the state, we felt like we wanted to stay there. We are hopeful that we will be able to maybe increase that number. What's nice about using 100 is it's easy to manipulate, right? We can just say, let's double it. If it's $200, that's an extra almost $400,000. Next item is that per pupil categorical aid number. No, we're not saying that we're getting $11,000 more for whatever reason. That actually is an impact of more students than the prior year. So we're anticipating slightly more students from our third Friday count than we had this year. That's like 15 kids or so, times the dollar amount that's in there right now. Open enrolled, we looked at our seniors, our graduating seniors in open enrolled, in and out. And then we looked at what's typical, what we've had for kindergarten the last year or two, and what we have kind of identified in the numbers that Tina just mentioned a little while ago. And we think we can see about another $89,000 there. Special education, we anticipate we know we had some more expenses this year, specifically related to opening Forest Edge Elementary. And it is that categorical reimbursement that we anticipate, as you play that out, would increase our revenue for that component. So that's not banking on an increase. You might have heard the governor's proposal increasing the reimbursement rate. This is just based on increased expenditures this year, translating that into that categorical percentage of $118,000. The next one is we didn't have a lot of revenues related to athletics, not as much related to Medicare, for on-site medical services that we typically provide, or parking revenues. We kind of gave a waiver to those this year. So putting those back in place at where they're at, we anticipate $177,000. Unfortunately, transportation is always paid the following year. And since we weren't encouraging people to ride the buses, we've had plenty, but not as many as normal. So we anticipate that being a reduction in revenues for next year. If you add all that up, we're looking at about $923,000 in additional funding that we're kind of basing our budget on at this point in time. On the expenditure side, the first thing that we started with educational compensation plan. We have educators that had anticipated an increase in their compensation, and we felt that that was probably one of our most important priorities, is to make sure that they realize that increase. So 490,000 is that number. We also had some kind of one-time expenses that we're using, kind of some carryover money in departmental budgets that we felt was really important to continue, related to mental health. And so for CVITs and mindful screenings, we added that to the budget so that we can sustain that over time. You'll see the next line item it doesn't have a number in it right now. We hope that as the financial picture becomes clearer and we go into the state budget and we know a little bit more, hopefully this summer, we might be able to revisit this line item. But right now, we're not anticipating any increases other than educators' compensation plan or salaries. We do typically have a number of staff members that earn their master's degree, and our compensation plan typically rewards that with an increase. And so we have a line item there based on potential people increasing their compensation that way. This is a goofy one, I apologize, but when we did the 2014 referendum, we had a system called InformaCast, which we use for emergency purposes to communicate information, as well as ring our bells, actually. And what we're doing here is, when we bought the system, we had a 3-year service agreement. That year, this is the last year of that service agreement. So we increased Mr. Weiss's budget so that he could continue to afford that. That's a 1-year agreement. Once we increase it by this amount, then we wouldn't have to worry about it. It'll be in the budget for the future. Health insurance, we were able to negotiate that down from a little over 3% to 2.5%. So there's a $140,000 impact on the board's side, on the employer's side for health insurance. Now I mentioned a little while ago that summer school was not as robust as it had been in the past. It was actually about 1/3 of the size of a program typically that would run. We don't think we're going to get the program all the way back up to where it would normally be this next summer, but we feel like we can get it a lot closer to where it was. So this $200,000 would get us about 2/3, generally speaking, to a summer school program that we're used to. We just think that a lot of our families still might not feel exactly comfortable coming into the school, and so we just think that it's going to take a little time to get there. So next year you would see, if we feel like we can get that program up to where it needs to be, or where it has been in the past, you'd see another $200,000 impact. Additional growth, this is just an allocation that we typically budget. Usually we budget $25,000 for additional students in the tier budget that we provide to buildings. As we add students or classrooms, we use those funds to buy classroom furniture, those types of things, as well as to kind of true up the dollars to use different buildings. So we took that down to $10,000 this year. We also have a bunch of staffing positions that we had to prioritize this year to try to figure out how we were gonna make this work, and there were budgeted positions that we backed off. Para-educators, those types of things that we felt like this next year we probably won't need. So that was actually a reduction in our special budget. And then we actually had some reductions in things related to COVID. There were budgeted items that we added this last year related to family first, FMLA leave, as well as stipends related to our staff members moving their materials and setting up their classrooms at Forest Edge. So since those things are behind us, hopefully now, definitely the Forest Edge thing, we were able to reduce the budget for those items. Transportation increase, typically we provided our transportation contractors the same amount as our staff increases, since we're right now proposing nothing at that point in time. We would come back and revisit this, hopefully when we have additional revenues with the transportation contractors as well. And then lastly, we had 3 additional positions. We actually had authorized 4 additional positions. We only paid, we funded 3. I could be wrong there. It was 4, okay. We funded 4 additional positions this last year. We feel that we need to continue to have 3 of those positions continue this next year, just because of the way the numbers fall with our additional school at Forest Edge. It would give us a little bit extra capacity for growth, as well as make everything kind of work as far as how the numbers go. So if you add those things up, we're under the $900,000 by about $142,000. What questions do you have for me?
Andy, how much is 1% on staff salary increases?
Oh boy, I used to know that. Gina, can you think of that?
I just want to give it just a ballpark to see what are we looking at?
If you look at all staff, about 300,000.
That sounds about right, yeah.
Okay,
CPI is 1.23%.
right. Anybody else with questions for Andy going through that? On the economic end of it? I think it's pretty familiar analysis which we've done in the past.
Yeah, I guess one, Andy, just to repeat for me and maybe people that this is the first time they're going through that, in terms of the conservative nature, this is a pretty conservative budget from a revenue perspective.
I'd like to think so. I'd rather not come to you and say I got a problem, right?
Right.
But I will say that there are peers of mine that are even more conservative than I am.
Yeah.
And I'm hopeful. The state has some pretty strong finances right now that we can get closer to the governor's proposal than what I'm proposing.
And conversely, the expenditures are pretty on. I mean, you're pretty set on these are going to be the expenditures.
I believe so.
Okay, thanks.
And again, Andy, if we got what we got last year from the state, it's a $400,000 swing.
Yes, based on the $200 to $100, yes.
Okay.
Yep. And actually the year before that as well. Actually the year before that, we got a little bit more than that, but yep, last year for sure.
Kevin, do you have any questions on the economic end of it?
No, nothing that hasn't been asked. It's incredibly detailed, so thank you for that.
All else being equal, that little bit you got on health insurance is what's left here. So that, I hand it to the two of you for give them just a little more of a push.
Troy?
Andy, just one thing, I guess, to kind of restate the enrollment numbers. So if doing the math, I think right now we're down 9 students for our projections, down 9 students from this school year.
You added the columns up?
Yeah, I did. But then I understand, we have a pretty good idea of how many kindergartners continue to get enrolled, and I think that was the 35 number you mentioned. So we're in a good place. Probable to increase our enrollment above this budget, and then all the numbers kind of work out from there. Correct. I think that's all I had on the number side of it.
I mean, those numbers, Andy, is you just rolled the classes forward. Yeah, okay, and that doesn't count any movements during the year with the building and the district at all?
Correct.
Okay.
So I just have one follow-up question to those numbers. So Gina, when you started, you said that 4K and kindergarten is trending up. But when I look at kindergarten, it trends down every year since 2014. What am I missing?
Well, and when I say, so if you look at the enrolled column, when I
Yes.
check their registrar, those are students that have already told us they're coming next year. So those would be even more than just rolling it up. So those are students that have contacted and registered.
Okay.
But we also, because of your question, Tim, we do have Mark Rockers also doing that second follow-up study for us so that we can have data to put behind what we've seen as, to see if our historical trend is going to continue or if we're going to be on that stick.
Okay, great.
The other thing I'd suggest is, that they're fairly consistent, statistically until last year, this year, really. And we do feel that we've heard that there have been people that have held their students back from kindergarten this year because of the pandemic.
That would make sense to me. Okay.
So we could get, those students enrolling as well as.
Sure. Understood. Okay, thank you.
And those numbers usually jump during the summer.
It's just
You know.
that these numbers are at the same time, the second Friday.
Right.
It's the same measurement time every single year here, so it kind of equalizes whether they jump or not.
Yeah, so this is a snapshot in time.
Yes.
Okay. So then we're done with the economics, and Gina, then you're gonna jump into the recommendations.
Yeah, so one of the things we look at, if we have funds available that we're confident in, then we also look at what is critical for timing. So just to give an example of that, in terms of if we're adding a classroom teacher, we really need to add that in spring. Because students, we need to plan for those sections when students come to us in the fall. But if we're looking at something like increases for staff, that is something we can do and have done later in September or October once we have a more finite budget picture and know our third September count. So I also want to talk about that too, because we know that our staff have worked harder than ever. We know our contractors have worked harder than ever. And so what you're going to hear from us tonight as a team is the recommendation that you'll hear from us is really truly a function of timing as well. Because for me to add a teacher in October or a social worker that's building relationships is not helpful. So with that idea in mind, what we did is we looked at what we always look at, and that's our class sizes. And right now we feel really comfortable with the sections we have allocated for our classrooms, K-6. But as always, we watch our enrollment numbers over the spring and summer to make sure that we stay within those guidelines wherever possible. And so then we look at our class sizes, middle school and high school. And if you look at Appendix 1, you will see that we identified several areas in the middle school that are not only above 25, but are above 30 students per section. Now, this isn't surprising to us because we know when we started our planning that we have crowding at our middle schools, and that was phase 2 of our referendum planning. And so we are really starting to see the crunch there. And so when I talked with Dr. Anderson and her team, we said, well, what can we do if we don't have money available to add staff? How are we going to solve that problem? Because those are high class sizes for any subject area, but particularly for STEAM because it's hands-on, you need bigger spaces, right, for the kids to have the authentic STEAM experience. Also with art, is that you'll see several art classes. And so when we were talking, we thought, well, art and STEAM, does go really nicely together. So what are our options? And really we have 2 options. One is that we don't add a teacher. And what that means is our 7th graders, it would become a 1-semester course as opposed to a full year course. And then opposite that semester, they would have a study hall. Because we just can't fit the number of students in those classrooms. So that's one path. So alternatively, we thought a better path would be to use the limited funds we know we have available and add a STEAM and art teacher.
And we could reduce those class sizes for both STEAM and art, and then that would allow us to keep STEAM as a full year class for our 7th graders. So that is our first proposal for you, that we would add a STEAM and art full-time teacher at the middle school to address class sizes. And then as Candace previewed for you, is that we looked at adding 2 social workers based on the recommendation from the mental health committee's work that you heard tonight. And so right now, given our budget picture, that we are thinking that we will need to fund those positions potentially with one-time money. And so Andy and I are still working, and we'll have an exact proposal for you next time of where that money would come from. But we at least feel comfortable that we could fund it with one-time money for 2 years. And then we would either have to sustain that with our growth, or find a different funding source for that. Because we know that our student needs aren't going away. And that we feel, at least anecdotally, that they've increased, and we'll have the Dane County survey data next time, hopefully, to verify that. And the other piece I would say is working with nonprofit world is it's not uncommon to have nonprofit social work jobs as a more, grant funded or one-time money. That's a 2-year position with the hope that it would continue in the future. But honestly, with any, public employee, there isn't ever a guarantee that a position is funded for the future. So we would like to meet our student needs now. We know they're there. And so use one-time money at least for the next 2 years with the hope that we could find ongoing funding as we continue to grow. So that is our best thinking in table 1. In terms of what we would like to ask the board for next time based on your feedback tonight. So then also wanted to give you table 2, just to let you know that we know that those needs are out there. We realize we don't have the money right now for them, so we wanted to keep them on your radar because we know that they are significant needs for our students. And we will be continuing to work on a plan to fund similar positions as we have more funding available. And then really the last part of my report is section 3, where I'm just giving you a picture of where we are resignation and retirement wise. I do want to say in terms of our retirement is that we are a little bit higher than we normally are, but really that is a function that last year we were very low compared to where we normally are. And I just want to say thank you to our staff because a number of those folks said, out of loyalty to kids and the district, I'm going to stay this year. I'm going to change my thinking and give it one more year and stay with the district. And so, given the challenges of being in this environment, and I'm just really appreciative that teachers that have such a long tenure with us and all of those relationships stayed with us this year. And so I told them I'm always sad for us when folks retire, but extremely grateful and happy for them because they've earned that to start the new journey in their life. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Gina, with at the April 12th meeting, what would you be looking for the board to approve in terms of the priorities for staffing?
I would be asking, depending on feedback tonight, for the board to approve adding the positions in table 1, which is the full-time STEAM and art, and then the 2 social work positions. And
then kind of put a hold on 2 as we wait through the summer to see what the financial picture looks like?
Correct.
Okay. My feedback is that I like that approach. It's one we've used in the past. It's a conservative economic one, but it gets us to being able to recruit those hard to fill play spots, earlier. Okay. I think that we will need to look at as a board as we go forward through the late spring, early summer is the staff salary increases. I would hate not to be able to give at least a cost of living increase because I don't want our educational comp plan basis to lose ground. So I think that's important for us to look at. I mean, we don't have that in a table 2, but if the economic picture looks good for me, that's the next step. in the analysis personally.
Yes, your thinking would match ours. We, in terms of, we understand that table 2 is likely not going to occur this year, but just wanted you to know that we know those needs are out there and that you will be seeing these positions again.
Yeah, and I just point that out because that isn't in table 1 or 2, but in my mind, as the funding looks like it's gonna firm up, that's gotta be in the next round of prioritization. For me, that's a high one. Okay, Anna? Any feedback or questions?
I agree with what you just explained as far as the importance of looking at the staff salary as well as transportation contract increases. Our bus drivers have been tremendous this year. We keep hearing about that as well as the staff, so I would support that. The other comment that we have is that, I think that last year we had the math intervention K-8 position listed as a need. And so my only comment there is that, if we see that we have demands for additional supports for that academic situation, I think that's something we need to pay close attention to, and so something that it is a priority for me as well. I understand we don't have the ability necessarily to fund everything that we on our wish list, but that is a piece that's important to me for us to be really closely monitoring to ensure that we're able to provide the resources that are needed. I did have one question about the appendix 2, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly on that. I was just looking at some of the courses, and I think I counted up 58 of the courses in particular that show that they're over capacity. And I'm just curious how that's handled. I don't know if I'm reading this right, but page 1, it's like animals, plants, and you. There's 88 requests. There are 2 sections, which would mean an average class size of 44, while our class cap is 24. Does that mean that 20 students are not going to be able to take that class, or how is that handled?
Thank you so much for asking that, because I should have mentioned, so we're at a little different place timing-wise for the high school for this report. So right now, my understanding from Mr. Kleiner is these are requests, but it's not actual commitments to take the courses or not the actual class size of the courses. So it's a gauge of interest from students of what they would like to take, but it may not be what they'll end up taking because either, of course, like let's say we have 5 students interested in a course, that course won't run, so then those students would have to take something else, or they're gauging us, if we have 48 kids interested, then we may have 2 sections of that class. So this is really just gauging student interest to give them input on designing schedules and class sizes, but it's not actual class sizes itself.
Okay.
And Mr. Kleiner is here if people have specific questions for him, and I said, all right, if I ask Mr. Kleiner to make sure that I accurately summarize that. Mr. Kleiner?
You did, and ag, we tend to, Jillian Beatty is a department unto herself, and ag is a really popular course, and we're monitoring really closely those course requests. She likes to offer a wide variety of courses, and so yes, there will be some students whose access to her animals, plants, and you will be limited for sure.
That's helpful. I just was looking at this kind of out of curiosity of what that meant, but no further questions or comments from me at this point.
Just a couple of quick things. I'm glad to see the STEAM on here, and thanks for explaining that. I think it was 3 years ago when we increased the STEAM programming at OMS, and that was partially due to some of the high numbers of study halls that we had. So I don't want to go back to that. So I'm glad that that's on the list. I agree with Anna about the math intervention, being that that's second year we've seen that, we know that's a need. I do wonder if that's a position though, if we do have some extra funds, that could be a portion of an FTE. I think sometimes those interventionists are split between buildings. And so maybe we can tackle a portion of that. And that's really all I had. Nice job, thank you.
Kevin, do you have anything on Gina's outline of requests for next year?
Yeah, I guess the only question I think I have at this point is the additional future resources besides the math interventionist being requested in the past. Have either of the other two roles been requested, or are those new requests in the past? The bilingual educator and equity coordinator, are these kind of new, or are these popped up before in past budgets?
Kevin, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So in terms of the math intervention and the bilingual, we have requested in the past. The equity coordinator is a new position. We've noticed that other districts are starting to add that, and we understand that that's one of our values and is a priority for us. So we did want to introduce that position to the board in this conversation.
Okay, and I imagine those duties are being split currently by multiple people, or?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm again always happy to see more resources put towards STEAM, being a scientist myself, and obviously knowing how important the arts and the whole child is. And I had, questions on what was in red in the appendix, and those have been answered. So thank you.
Tim?
So the STEAM roles in those eighth grade ads, not STEAM roles, the art ads, is there a reason why they're not considered part of STEAM, or does STEAM not officially begin until middle school or high school?
So we have various parts of STEAM K4, but then in fifth grade, STEAM is its own class.
Okay.
And so at the middle school, we have STEAM courses and we have art courses.
Mm-hmm.
So art is a dedicated class, but then Steve would have components of art in it as well.
Okay.
And so that's why we thought in terms of, because otherwise we would need a 0.1 or 0.2 art teacher to even have class sizes, which would be really difficult to recruit someone to teach one section a day. So in looking at the STEAM needs, thought it would fit really nicely together. And right now, our STEAM teacher and our art teacher at middle school do the TLC and the collaborative work together. So to add a third person to that team would fit perfectly.
Purely an economic question here. We've got 14 to 16 retirements. We're obviously backfilling those. Is there some pickup there that isn't represented here that could magically fund some of this?
I hope so. So it depends who we hire, because
Sure.
if you remember, we have the majority of our staff at the blue level, and that is where we tend to hire because we really are a destination district.
Sure.
But at the same time, we have some folks retiring that are off our schedule, right? And so we're hiring within the model, so there could be some potential savings there. But really it's a function of who we hire, because we really commit to hire the best fit for our students and our district. So I would say we don't see the turnover savings that other districts do that have a less compressed schedule. But it's very possible, and that's where we hope that our budget picture improves once we know our hiring and our student enrollment and our state budget.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you for asking that more delicately than I did. I appreciate that. That was one of my questions. And I do also want to really, as you mentioned, Gina, I'm glad you did, thank those teachers that are retiring or resigning, because they have been pillars of our district, and we really appreciate them sticking through with us through this year. So I really want to commend that and thank them. When do we assume we would get additional information from our offers? Do we have a kind of a timeline on that? Will that be in time to kind of inform the budget from a enrollment perspective, percentage?
It certainly wouldn't be by our meeting on April 12th.
Yeah.
However, it will be this spring, because that's what he committed to when we signed our contract.
Okay. Because that will, I mean, like you said, it may not impact this budget, but it's going to give us a picture. And I guess my question to Gina is, what are some of the deadlines for enrollment that will help kind of fill in this in terms of open enrollment or notifications of registration for kindergarten, or people that are, as we know, families that are potentially, that do live here that are coming back to us? Kind of can you give some timelines of what those dates would be?
Sure. So for open enrollment, applications are due by the end of April. but families can apply for multiple districts.
Right.
And so really, we ask them to inform us by early June. And so, but there's no commitment to actually attend, right? So it really isn't until they are here and are counted on that 3rd September. But families have been very good about, once they tell us they're coming, that they come. But there's nothing that holds them to that decision. But parents want to and families want to plan. So we look at our number of applications and the preference of the schools, so we can get a sense of if we feel they'll actually attend in Oregon or not. And then really we start enrolling families weekly, and as summer gets closer, really daily. So we want to we talk with our registrar and update those numbers and watch those class sizes, because we also need to place students that are new to us. Not only by geography, but where it makes sense from a class size perspective. And so, we have more firmer boundaries now that we have for that because of our transportation needs. And so that's wonderful for our families. But we have more designated in terms of where we have to place students. So really in terms of timelines, the true timeline families have is really the first day of school. But I see more and more students coming in September as homes finish and get built. So we try to get the message out, and we do a lot of communication around that. So please let us know as soon as possible when you know that you're coming to the Oregon School District if you moved into our community.
And then I do appreciate Steve's comment about at least a 1% for salary increases. I would support that as well. I think that's very important, given we know that we want to put the best teacher in every classroom, and that we know that teachers are one of the #1 determinants of student success. And so I think that's really important. I guess lastly, I just want to say, Gina, you wear a lot of hats with this district. You work on staffing and budget with Andy. You do HR, you do our legal. You've had a lot of open records requests. And so I really want to let you know how much you're appreciated in this district. And you have carried a load. You're working on vaccines for our teachers and healthcare plans. So I want to say publicly that we're really happy that you're in our district, and I really appreciate all your work.
You stole my thunder.
Sorry. You can repeat. The staffing plan and the budget building stuff is our tasks that take Andy and Gina's full-time work during a normal work year, and you pile that on and trying to move through what we're doing through. They're really doing 2 years work in 1 year's time. And so we really, Andy and Gina and Leslie, we really appreciate, and your whole staff really appreciate that, when we're trying to complete the end of the year and move forward under our phased restart and all the work that goes into that, we know that we're planning for next year to be a normal year, and that requires doing the budget stuff too. So thank you guys a lot. So the board, be prepared on April 12th to come back. The recommendation would be to fund those tier 1 spots. Okay, that's going to be the ask on April 12th. Okay, and then you've got information related to our preliminary revenue expenditure projection for this budget, which you guys are going to complete in October. Just to give you a sense of how this process works, but in terms of kicking the school year off, following that revenue stream through the spring and summer, and allocating those funds appropriately through your prioritization. So, but April's 12th when we're going to bring to the table 1. Gina, do you have something?
I just wanted to say thank you for the kind words. I really want to say thank you to the HR and finance team, because we have been pulled in many different directions, and they have just been amazing. And I know, I'm speaking for Andy right now, but I know how much Tara and Kelly in his department, and Julia and Lisa and Heather in my department have worked so hard to take care of things that we normally take care of. So I just really wanted to take the opportunity to say it truly is a team effort. So when you say thank you to us, like I know you're saying thank you to them as well. So I just wanted to recognize that because they are working harder than ever and it's just really appreciated. So thank you.
All right. Let's move on to the last item on our information items, and that's Leslie's report, which, because we had a report last Wednesday,
It will be great.
this will be short because
It will be brief.
we've run through it already.
Katie, do you mind showing the 20-second video though? 'Cause you know.
Why don't we wait on that? Because let's
We're at
leave,
the end.
we want to do it at the end and leave on that really good note.
I like that
I'm
idea.
exercising my prerogative.
Do it while you can, Steve, do it while you can.
That's right. Good
The
job, good job.
point is, it's a feel good, so let's make sure that we're
We're
utilizing
gonna
it
get
well.
to it, but why don't you go run through yours?
Excellent. Okay, so here are the numbers. We asked our families to complete the survey if they plan to change their model in the last quarter of the school year. And you can see here that we did have a bit of a change, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have that planning time for buses and classes and all the schedule rearranging. I'd say that overall, we went down maybe 5% of our students who were in Oregon online moved to phased restart. Not a significant amount, but enough that it is, you can see it in the numbers here. Because I believe that the high school grades 9 through 12 originally were about 32% who were in Oregon online, and the rest were phased restart, and now we're down to 28. And a lot more middle schoolers came back because I think they were right around that lower 30s also, and now they're down to 25. So you can see that we have a slight shift, and that's great. That means that there are people who are comfortable in coming back into the building. But it also means that at the high school, for example, there's still 28% of our students who are accessing their education through Oregon Online. And so considering the fact that there was a lot of commentary in the beginning, various shared opinions related to Oregon Online, I thought this would be a good opportunity for Mr. Pliner to just share a few words about his conversations with students, because if you remember from the last meeting, he's pulling in students for small focus groups on a regular basis to try to check in and see what they think about the model and how it's working for them. So Mr. Pliner, if you could just share a little bit about what you've heard from students, and then we'll move on.
Thank you, Dr. Bergstrom. You know, before February 8th, we had 1,200 online learners, and after February 8th, we had 360. And when we think about how we're doing, there's a number of indicators that we look at. Number one is outreach to parents and students. We picked up the telephone early in the experience to, number one, check to see why people had made the elections that they had, as well as what were their early experiences like. And we wanted to open up lines of communication so that our folks could communicate with us. Secondly, we had parent-teacher conferences just a short time ago, and it was an opportunity for me in particular to try to get to some conferences of our online families. And what was really impressive to me was the approach that our teachers took with helping support students and the ability or the want to go above and beyond. Our online learners have live meets as a part of their week. They've got asynchronous learning as a part of their week. And the vast majority of our folks have additional meets or small groups with individual teachers who are willing to do whatever it takes to get them there. A couple of things, we had 360 kids that had elected to be online. We had 29 saying this last week that they want to return, and we had 5 that are going from in-person to online. So it's about a 93% retention rate in that format. What I can tell you is since February 8th, I have had absolutely 0 complaints from any parent or student in that online setting. And I can assure you that people know how to get in touch with me when they are unhappy with things. I get feedback all of the time, and I've had 0 complaints from any online families. Now, having said that, if there are people that are listening and are unhappy, I do want you to reach out, but to date, nothing. Secondly, grading data. While you've seen our grading data that has shown that our grades look pretty similar, we will, for the first time after break, we'll be posting grades where we can differentiate achievement for students that have chosen to return in our phased restart, as well as in our online formats. And we look forward to digging in and making really good sense of that. The third data point for me is teacher voice. I know how hard our staff is working to connect in, sometimes some of our staff have not physically been in the same room all year with some of their online learners, but they have gone above and beyond to make the connections and to weave new elements of practice into what they're doing so that they know their kids, they have the ability to interact, and they know what kids need. And so that's been really important to me as well. Is there an opportunity that, are there kids that we're concerned with in online learning? Absolutely. Are we concerned about kids that are part of our phased restart cohorts as well? Certainly we are. We're doing everything we can to track data and identify kids that need support. And you heard Candace on the screen earlier talking about the myriad of ways in which we are working to support kids. But we know that that front line is our classroom teachers. And so we're really pleased and proud of the work that they're doing. And we're always looking for ways to get better. I guess the last thing that I will say, and then I'll yield the floor, is this week, Mr. Tanner, myself, and Jen Schmidt, we're all interacting with some DPI digital learning consultants. And we were kind of looking forward into the future and trying to figure out what lessons we've learned and how we can really ground ourselves in the future in practices that really can strengthen what we've discovered or learned or developed here. And one of the things unsolicited that one of the consultants said was just how our approach to giving our online kids those dedicated times was the exact right thing to do. That they absolutely were very, very pleased with the approach that we had taken and had kind of cited that model prior to us saying, hey, that's what we're doing. So, we've got work to do. We always have work to do. And I couldn't be more proud of our staff and our students for how they're attacking it.
I just know that with 28% of our students at the high school engaged in that particular program, it was important to talk about it a little bit. Overall, we had 171 students switch from Oregon Online to phased restart throughout the whole district. So that's great. And we had 8 students go from phased restart to Oregon Online. Just a little bit of switching. And then a lot of people had to change their busing because, their schedules changed and what they needed from the transportation department changed. So from last Monday's meeting what our action steps were. That we emailed our families. The deadline was last night. Now we're beginning the logistics phase with all of the data that we were able to collect. And the week after spring break is when we'll finalize all of those bus rides and communicate the new schedules and the new routes to people. And that's also a time period when we'll try to do as much of the mandated state testing as we can possibly do, so that when our kids come back on April 12th, our phased restart students are back in for more time, we can start going at a really fast clip without having too many interruptions related to testing. And we move that PD day so that we don't have to stop for that either. Remember, that is April 9th, the new professional development day, April 9th, not April 23rd. And then our medical working group, as you know, were very important in this last phase of the decision making because they helped us quite a bit with our questions related to a safe amount of distance between students in classrooms. And interestingly, right after the medical working group, later that week is when the CDC revised their guidance also. So you can tell that what we heard from our medical working group was spot on with the information the CDC released less than a week later. And for our equity update, you've continued to see this slide every week, and that's because we are making progress on what you see here every single week. And I think one of the things that I'll mention as far as a highlight from the last week is last Thursday night, we had our Parents of Students of Color discussion group facilitated by Nehemiah, and that was their second meeting of the school year. And we prepared some materials for them related to how we celebrated Black History Month, and also some beginning information related to student discipline policies and procedures. So we have a meeting that we are scheduling with Nehemiah to find out the next steps. And we're really excited about being able to continue to work not only with Nehemiah, but most importantly with our parents. Here we go. Drum roll, please. Not really, but hear it in your head. We hired a new Netherwood principal starting July 1st, and we are really, really excited to welcome Lindsay Eimerman to our Oregon School District team. So we had a very extensive interview process, actually 3 rounds of interviews. So it was wonderful to have someone as talented as Lindsay rise to the top in that process. She's currently a principal, an elementary principal in the Edgerton School District. Prior to that, she worked in the Middleton School District, where she served as a math interventionist, 4th grade teacher, even a dean for a period of time at their middle school. So she brought a lot of her Middleton experience to Edgerton, where she spent her first 3 years in her principal career. And now she is coming to us. And we are very excited to welcome her to the team. And then I want to say congratulations to Hannah Schwartzmiller. She did the design for the Pi Day sticker. And those of you who haven't been in a high school for a while might not really understand what a big day Pi Day is. But it's actually a very big day at the high school. The kids really get into Pi Day in a way that one would not expect. And so the fact that we now have student designed stickers to celebrate that day is a pretty cool thing. And I think that's it.
Anybody have any questions for Leslie? Kevin?
No, just an extra shout out to my niece, Hannah. Really nice design.
Very good. All right, that takes us away from informational items into the closing future agenda. April 12th meeting, we're gonna maybe have the youth survey, maybe.
We'll see.
But for sure the staffing, and then I'll report from Leslie on the school start, because
It'll be that day.
that'll be the day when we have the next phase of the phase restart. So, and then if anybody has any items that they want placed on the agenda, let me know. Anyway, all right. Well, let's go through. We'll do checkout, and then we'll do our video before we do the motion to adjourn. Tim?
Just a quick question. What is the typical turnaround time that we get usable information from standardized testing?
Months.
Months, really?
That's why the whole usability of the data, there's a lot of questions about that, because it's usually months.
Okay, all right. Nothing else for me.
Okay, Krista, any checkout? Troy? Nothing. Kevin?
No, sir.
Okay, Anna?
Nothing.
All right, let's play the video. This is my checkout. I'm gonna take credit for this. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We're adjourned at 9 o'clock. Thanks, everyone.
Oh my God, it's the cutest thing ever.
That is so cute.
I'll take that home tonight.
Oh.